there's a big difference between religion and just being religious and actually being a saved, born-again person walking with Christ. There's a big difference.
You are listening to the Christian Music Archive podcast, part of the New Release Today podcast network. I'm your host, Dave Maurer. Each week, I share stories about Christ, community, and music, chatting with musical guests who you will find listed on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. There are thousands of creative men and women who have helped shape the soundtrack of the Christian faith, and we get to hear their stories, learn about how Christ has made a difference in their life, and hopefully along the way, we'll learn how we can be a better part of our community. We'll get to our interview in just a minute, but I'm excited to first tell you about the Work of Mercy, Inc. in Colombia. They have a project there called Soy Satura, which is helping feed kids who are crossing the border from Venezuela to go to school. You see, the schools in Venezuela are not very good, so moms are taking their kids to school in Colombia where they can get a decent education. Now, the Colombia government is willing to provide an education to these kids, but they won't feed them like they do the Colombian children. And most of these kids from Venezuela are from really poor families that don't even have money to feed their kids. So Mercy Inc. is taking soybeans to create both food and juice that they are able to feed these kids, sometimes the only meal they will get in a day. I sure would like to share more about the Soy Satura project and how you can get involved. Would you head over to the website christianmusicarchive.com/mercy so you can learn how you can help feed these kids? Our intent is to make a difference around the world through this podcast, and one of the ways we do that is through the Work of Mercy, Inc. So again, head over to christianmusicarchive.com/mercy and discover how you can make a difference to the children of Venezuela. My guest today was a member of some band. And no, I'm not trying to be secretive or protect the identity of my guest. But if you are a fan of early 80s Christian pop, you'll recognize the background music you're hearing as Steve Taylor. And that sax you hear is Dave Thrush. Today, we get to hear about Dave Thrush's career as part of Steve Taylor and some band. But we'll also hear about his religion being changed into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Dave is going to share that his decision to follow Christ didn't necessarily make everything go smoothly. In fact, he experienced just the opposite. But his relationship with Jesus definitely helped him through some tough times. So let's let Dave tell his story and jump into the conversation I had with Dave Thrush. I am very excited to talk to somebody that I have listened to his music for a lot of years, vicariously through his high school friend, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Dave Thrush.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Hey, we are the Daves we know.
That's right. We got to be careful. We might start a band or something.
Uh-oh. Dangerous.
I first discovered you on the credits of an album from Steve Taylor.
That is correct. That was my intro into Christian music.
So how did you meet Steve and how did you get started playing with Steve?
Well, we were in high school, jazz band together, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah, 1975, 76, North Glen High School. North Glen, Colorado, a suburb of Denver, and we were in the same class. So, and I got to know Steve, and he got to know me. And I was the Catholic kid, raised in the Catholic church. He was the Baptist preacher's kid, and we just, started getting coffee and stuff, and hanging out. And we were in jazz band, so we saw each other every day. And that's where I first met him.
So did he come up to you and say, hey, I'm starting this band, I need a sax player, would you help me out? Or how did that connection happen?
Well, that was a few years later. He had already finished college pretty much. I went to CSU, Colorado State, for a year and then dropped out because I hated college. And I just wanted to play, man, I was actually working a job for a couple of years after 1 year at CSU. As a printer, and it's interesting because I have something in common with Bill Murray, believe it or not. I was a printer at Regis College, Regis University, which is a Catholic school in Denver, and Bill Murray went there for a while.
Oh, no kidding.
I don't think I ever met him, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I was a print. I worked in the print shop there, and then I wasn't even playing him. I'd quit playing and stuff. After college, got kind of just discouraged and stuff. And spiritually, I was in a really strange place. So back in those days, kind of wandering. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I was raised Catholic and all that stuff, but then baptized as an infant, the whole deal.
Right.
My mom has the picture of me being baptized and all that. And then my teen years, I started kind of going out there, partying, and as teens will do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of wandered off and started going off into some weird, stuff and a little bit of Eastern religion and this and that. And I'm like, I just quit college. And so I was just kind of wandering, spiritually. And then what was it, about 1981, I think it was. And Steve contacted me out of the blue. He'd already finished college, I think at Biola and CU. And then I was just working jobs, playing a gig here and there once in a while. And he contacted me and said, I want you to play on this demo, Dave. You know how Steve talks.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve had more energy than anybody ever.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Anyway, he still does. But yeah, so I played on his demo, which was the Clone demo. And, he brought me in and he formed a band with Cactus Mosier and Woody Waddell, the original members. Kerry Connor, the guitar player, and the producer of that record was Jonathan David Brown.
Yeah.
Who was a long time in Christian music, and I didn't even know what Christian music was. I mean,
Right.
I was raised Catholic, like, what is contemporary Christian music? What is that? I mean, I was used to guitar mass, Kumbaya, my Lord,
Right.
that kind of stuff. And they didn't use saxophones in Catholic church. So I was like, wow, this is different.
So did you have any clue when you started working with Steve on those early demos that there was something in this, or did you think, this is just Steve being Steve and who knows what's going to
No,
happen?
I kind of recognized right away. It's like, wow, I think this could go somewhere. I recognized it right away. Yeah. So I stuck around.
Yeah. Well, and because he then, as I recall the story, he shopped that demo to a number of labels, and most of those labels
Right.
said, yeah, this isn't quite what we want
Yeah.
to hear.
Yeah. That whole story, but yeah. So what happened was he got a gig at the Christian Arts Seminar in Estes Park, and after we finished the demo, and that was our first gig, to be honest.
Oh.
And he got signed right off the side of the stage. We did our gig, blew him away.
Yeah.
And I think Billy Ray Hearn and Bill Hearn and those, they were there and they signed him, I think, almost immediately.
Wow.
And that's how it happened. So yeah, then we just made the record in John Sundberg's basement in Lakewood, Colorado.
Oh,
close
no
to
kidding.
Golden. Yeah, it was just a basement recording studio at that time, and he called it John Sundberg's basement.
Yeah.
And now it's called FTM Studios. He's got a full blown like big media production, 2-room large facility. It's called FTM Faith Tape Ministries.
Oh, very cool.
Back in those days, yeah, Jonathan David Brown was a producer, and he stuck me in the shower stall for the Clone recording.
Natural
That's where I
reverb.
recorded. Yeah, natural reverb. Yeah, it's kind of like this, natural reverb like that.
Right. Well, so Steve started touring that. You went along with him, and you toured with him ultimately for 5 or so years, right?
It was more than that. It was almost 7.
Wow.
Almost 7 years. I was an original member of that band, like I said, with Cactus, who's now married to Winona Judd, believe it or not. Isn't that wild?
Crazy, huh?
And I've met her. Yeah, it's crazy, man. This whole thing has been a crazy ride the last 40 years. So, yeah, anyway, we went on the road, and I think we played like a Calvary Chapel in California, one of our first gigs. Costa Mesa, Chuck Smith. I think that might have been one of our first gigs, actually.
Wow.
In that church, and we were jumping up and down on the stage, and I'm not sure they quite understood what we were about, but so that was interesting. And then we just went and started touring, man.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I ended up playing at a Calvary Chapel years later in the worship band.
Oh
So
wow. Yeah.
yeah, like many years
Full
later.
circle. Full circle.
Full circle, yeah.
Well,
Right.
well, you went on with Steve and you toured the world, but when
Mhm.
you finished up with Steve Taylor, you ended up moving to
Mhm.
L.A., right?
Yeah, I did. And then Steve just disbanded some band.
Mm-hmm.
We did that one last record, which was what was it? Yeah, I think it was the I Predict record. He finished that, and then he decided to move to Nashville, and so he disbanded the some band thing and wanted to go out to Nashville. And I stayed in L.A.
Mm.
and just started doing different stuff. You know, the L.A. thing. I did some jazz stuff with a guy named Rob Mullins, who's a great keyboard guy, and played some jazz festivals and that sort of thing with him out. And we did a radio show, opened for Tom Scott once. So I was just doing the kind of the musician thing in LA, after that.
So were you doing mostly hired gun stuff or studio stuff?
For a while, I wasn't doing a lot of studio stuff, just very little of that. It's hard to get into that
Mm.
scene in in LA because it's like, you got to die to get into a spot there.
Yeah.
And so I was doing the jazz scene, jazz clubs, and that sort of thing with some different artists. And then it was kind of interesting because then my future wife and I ended up moving down to Orange County,
Okay.
California, and then I started playing in churches there.
Hmm.
I'm like this one worship leader named Rick Founds introduced me. He said, "Hey, you want a church gig?" I'm like, "What's that? What's a church gig?"
Yeah.
And I'd played in churches with Steve, but I didn't know they like had gigs in churches. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Rick Founds, who wrote the song "Lord, I Lift Your Name on High,"
Okay, that Rick.
he's
Yeah.
the songwriter of that. He asked me, "Hey, you want a church gig at my church?" And I'm like, "Yeah, cool." It was a Calvary Chapel there, and Chuck Smith Jr. was the preacher,
Okay.
and probably the only Calvary Chapel that ever used a saxophone. I think. I think Chuck was he did things differently than his dad, and so he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna have a rock band."
Oh, fun.
But yeah, so I played there for 6 years, and then I moved to Orange County, and then I got married. My wife and I got married, and we lived in Laguna for a while, and that's where my first son, was born. So, and he's quite a story. My son, he was a 2 pounder preemie,
Mm.
and 2 pounds 2 ounces, and 2 months early, and that's quite a story because I mean, they even suggested abortion at one point. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm
Yeah.
not going to abort my own child
Right.
because they said he's going to be deformed. I'm like, no, that ain't happening. I'm pro-life,
Yeah.
strong pro-life. And so he was born early, and he was about the size of a loaf of bread.
Wow.
I have pictures of that.
Wow.
And now he's 28, married, and he's got a 4-year degree from CCU, Colorado Christian
Wow.
University.
Wow.
So yeah.
So how when your son was born so preemie, you had your faith to fall back on, but I'm sure
Right.
that was a difficult time. I mean, that's got to have been,
Oh yeah.
Lord, what's going on?
Oh yeah, definitely. We didn't know what was going on. It was my wife had a lot of complications,
Mm-hmm.
something called toxemia.
Mm.
So they had to take the baby early by C-section, and yeah, and that's how it happened. And the one of the doctors, a geneticist, said your son's going to be deformed, and that wasn't true because he's not deformed. So
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting.
So did you have to just kind of struggle through that by yourself, or did you have people that were surrounding you during that time? Or
Oh no, no, I had church people, and we had people at the Calvary Chapel I was playing at praying for us the whole time.
yeah.
Plus extraneous friends that my wife had back in those days from Southern California. We had a lot of Christian musicians that in the kind of Maranatha music
Mm-hmm.
scene at that time.
Yeah.
Bill Batstone
Oh,
and
sure.
Daryl Cook and a lot of people that had, and my wife was involved in a prayer group, and I was friends with all those guys and stuff, and they were all praying for us all the time. And plus Steve Taylor and the Taylors and
Yeah.
people in Nashville too. We had a ton of backup.
Yeah, one of my reasons for starting this podcast was to talk about the importance of community, and going through a situation like that where you're not sure what's going to happen, and
Yeah,
I mean it's totally out of your control. There's nothing you can do to help your son.
not at all. It was, yeah, totally out of our control. Nothing. And the doctors were suggesting abortion, which I thought was, wow, that's just out there, man. But I've heard that story before. So
Well, can you tell us how maybe a specific individual, or I mean, you talked about people praying for you, but how did that manifest itself? In the real rubber meets the road kind of thing.
I mean, I consider my son a miracle, really. I mean, he could have died. The doctor said he's got a 50-50 chance
Hmm.
of being born, and he's got a 50-50 chance of coming out of this hospital. And he spent 3 months in the ICU,
Yeah.
and all that. And back in those days, it wasn't as refined
Mm.
with the preemies. These days, they can save kids that are like a pound. Yeah, but back in those days, a 2 pounder was very small, and so we spent just 3 months. I was playing gigs in Orange County, and also playing at the Calvary Chapel in San Juan Capistrano,
Hmm.
every week. So that was a church position, paid position, and plus I was doing club gigs too, just to make a living, and recordings and this and that. And so yeah, we just spent 3 months going back and forth to the hospital every single day, or twice a day even. And then I would sometimes finish at church, and then I would drive straight to the hospital and go see how my son was doing, and he got bigger. So they always get bigger.
I can't imagine what that would have done to you, just emotionally and spiritually, and how draining that must have been.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was very draining.
Yeah.
Took a lot out of us, and more out of my wife for sure, because she was the one that was sick with
Yeah.
this toxemia stuff. So,
And I'm assuming she's healthy now, and that's part of the answer to prayer.
oh yeah, she's good, no problems.
Well, you mentioned it a little bit earlier as we were talking about working with Steve, that you really weren't a Christian, obviously raised Catholic, and you
Right.
knew some of that kind
Hmm.
of high church stuff. What was your
Right.
what was your journey to faith like, where you realized, hey, a relationship with
Right.
Jesus is important to me
Mhm.
personally?
Well, like I said, I was raised a Catholic, and playing with Steve, was quite an eye opener for me. Those guys were evangelicals, and I was the one oddball Catholic.
Mm.
And so I began to recognize at one point that, wait a minute, these guys know a lot of Bible that I don't know.
Mm.
I noticed the difference. Particularly a couple of guys, Glenn Holman, the bass player.
Mhm.
Some of them guys knew Bible like 100 times better than I did, and I was noticing that.
Hmm.
Like, wait a minute, these guys really know their
So, what were
Bibles,
they
and
just
I
talking
don't.
about it in conversation, or how did you notice
Yeah,
that? Yeah,
just on the road. I mean, you're driving in a Dodge van for 10 hours a day, so
yeah,
with your pillow is a an alternator, that kind of stuff, or somebody's guitar case,
yeah, yeah.
and so all these conversations, or you're in the restaurant, on the road, and I mean, because touring with Steve, this went on for a long time, and the first 3 years was a van, and and in the hotel rooms, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, and just a lot of conversations over a long period of time. And I was like, wait a minute, these guys know their Bible a lot better than I do,
Hmm.
you know? And well, Steve would quote scriptures on stage. And so, anyway, something just kind of hit me. And then in 1986, I really just, I made a step of faith. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I want to talk about this too, because I think you can be raised in a religion and not be saved.
Yes.
I don't know if, maybe I'm talking to somebody out there. I don't know. But I was raised in a religion, but I wasn't born again. I was baptized as an infant, the whole deal. But then I asked the Lord into my heart. I said, Jesus, I believe in you, one night when we'd gotten done with a tour,
Mm.
1986. We came home. I think we'd gotten home from Australia or
Hmm.
something. And I just committed my life to Christ. And I had never done that before,
Mm.
I would always just say, I'm a Catholic,
Yeah.
I'm religious, just wrote religion. But and then that's when the crazy stuff started. The spiritual warfare started happening.
Yeah.
Really, was when I confessed Christ for real. But then I started reading my Bible, like, hey, wait a minute, Jesus is saying you must be born again.
Mm.
What does that mean? I think I just did that.
Mm.
And the story of Nicodemus, and Jesus is telling Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee, religious dude,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
the religious dude of the religious dudes, and he said, "You must be born again." And I'm like, wow, how come I never read that? I never learned these scriptures and other things, that I started seeing in the Bible, like there is one mediator between men and God, and that is Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
There is only one mediator. And I was taught as a kid to pray to Mary, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where I differ with my Catholic friends
Mm-hmm.
on stuff, on doctrinal things like that. And I don't want to bash Catholics. I don't bash them. I just say, look, I'm a born again Christian. Okay, I'm saved, and I've gotten into numerous debates with my Catholic, including my own family. My mom is 85; she's still
Mm-hmm.
Catholic, and we've just learned to agree to disagree on some issues.
So, Dave, what did that prayer, how did that change? You said that you started seeing some spiritual warfare, but
Oh, big time.
what did that change do to you that made it say, oh, religion is more than rote stuff, it's a relationship? How did that manifest itself
Right.
for you?
Well, I just started talking about, stuff like the Bible. I started reading the Bible for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never been taught that,
Yeah.
growing up as a Catholic. I had never been taught that. It's like, no, the priest does that,
Mm.
and that's the priest's job, and he's the intermediary. And then I read, wait a minute, there's only one intermediary, and that is Christ Jesus. I'm like, that's different than I grew up learning. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I just started reading the Bible really for myself,
Yeah.
and then I moved to California. I left my house here, in Colorado, and then went out and moved to California. And I got involved in an evangelical church, and that was that Calvary Chapel, because I'd never been taught really Bible.
Mm.
I mean, I'd heard scriptures as a kid
Yeah.
from priests, but it was just little bitty bits, and I never was taught that you should get into the Bible for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between religion and just being religious,
Yeah.
and actually being a saved, born again person walking with Christ. And that, to me, there's a big difference. And so I just started reading the Bible. Really, I
Mm-hmm.
picked one up, you know, and all this time surrounding me were these people, I think, who were probably praying for me,
Mm-hmm.
all this time. In Steve's band, certain people. I had a girlfriend that was a really strong Christian at one point during that time period
Mm-hmm.
when I was with Steve. She was a very strong Christian. I know she was probably praying for me and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and all these other people, Steve Taylor's sister, Dawn, I think all these people had been praying for me for a long time, you know.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, man, I just woke up.
Yeah.
Light bulb went on.
So describe life for yourself. I'm thinking that there might be somebody listening to this who's kind of thinking, I might be interested in a relationship with Jesus, but
Hmm.
what good is it for me? I mean, so describe for you the change before your prayer
Hmm.
to say, "Come into my heart, Jesus,"
Hmm.
and after.
Hmm.
What changed in your life personally?
Uh, I don't know. It was like something just kind of took over. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And that was God, of course. I'd never been directed by God. I mean, I'd been just kind of running my own life. And then when I prayed that prayer, and then I started cracking open the Bible for myself, and things started drastically changing. For one thing, my own family kind of almost disowned me,
Oh.
back then, because they were still solid Catholics, and they didn't understand what I was talking about. And like, I was talking about being born again, and Jesus, and getting saved, and angels and devils, and they were like, "Man, what the heck has happened to Dave?"
Yeah.
He's like gone crazy. He's like gotten religion, you know. But it was a real spiritual awakening, though. You know, my eyes got opened.
I can hear somebody saying, if I make this decision for Christ and my family disowns me, that's not something that sounds appealing to me. So what would you just
Well,
say to them?
I would say that that's actually pretty normal. You know, the Bible doesn't promise we're going to have a bunch of nice, fancy, fun stuff. I mean, I get along with my family now,
Hmm.
but I'm talking 35 years later.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm here, you know,
Yeah.
and we get along okay now. But back in those days, there was a real division,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
and the word talks about that too, you know, that once you decide to follow Christ, the world is going to start not liking you or even hating you. And I saw that for real. And I think, you know, over especially in evangelical circles over the last 30 years, we've been told it's going to be all roses and colorful and beautiful, and you're going to be rich. And I'm like, no, that wasn't my experience. It got hard, it got really hard. I mean, but I buckled in, you know.
Yeah.
But I could tell that there was something driving me, and what it was the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't running my own life anymore. Something else was running it, and that was the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
It got tough, you know, and it still is tough.
You went through some tough stuff. You had a son that you adopted and and
Correct.
and he passed away. That would have been a difficult thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process and
Sure.
how the Lord walked you through that?
That's another hard thing. I mean, we adopted Juan back. It was almost 19 years ago now. He was 5, and we got him through Adams County Social Services. This wasn't a international adoption. It was one right here, and that's how I wanted to do it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, because a lot of my evangelical friends were adopting kids like from other countries, and first of all, I didn't have that kind of money, and my wife she wanted to really adopt a child and stuff, and I'm like, I was hesitant, to be honest, because my elder son is autistic.
Mm.
And so we already had one son with a disability. He's got Asperger's, Cole does, but you know, he's brilliant though. He's got a college degree, but it's a disability. And so we adopted Juan, who had fetal alcohol syndrome.
Mm.
He had attachment disorder from Adams County Social Services, and he came with a lot of stuff, you
Mm-hmm.
know, a lot of baggage. His mother was a drug addict and you know addicted to alcohol. And Juan was born addicted to alcohol and cocaine when he
Mm.
was born.
Wow.
If you want to mess up a kid, make sure and drink and do drugs while you're pregnant. I mean, because that's the sure way to do it.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
just don't. Just stay away from drugs and alcohol when you're pregnant. Don't even go there. But it really, you know, Juan had a ton of disability, you know, lots of it.
Yeah.
So we adopted Juan, and our house completely changed.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
From one just focused on an autistic child and rearranging the entire house around that, which is a strange thing to begin with. But then to now we brought in another kid with a very severe disability,
Yeah.
even more. And so yeah, that got real interesting and a lot of stress, you know. And but you know, it's adoption is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say that right up. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also the best thing I've ever done. I mean, Jesus said, you know, what is or Paul, I'm sorry, that Paul said, what is real religion? Taking care of orphans and
Mm-hmm.
widows, right?
Yeah.
So we brought one right into our own house. That's kind of what it's about, right?
Yeah. So that was a tough situation. You're raising this kid. He's now,
Hmm.
you had him for 15 years and then he
Right.
passed away.
Right. Yeah. That was just 3 years ago. And Juan was 20. He was getting close to 21, and and you know, our relationship was becoming really quite good. The older Juan got,
Mm-hmm.
we struggled when he was younger because of his defiant disorder, and we really struggled. You know, him and
Yeah.
I. It was difficult. I'm not going to say it was easy because it wasn't. His last 2 years, though, before he died, we were getting along great and we were having a great time. We'd go to dinner and just you know, starting to have fun with each other, you know.
Yeah.
And then was just playing on his computer one night, Fortnite, the game that all
Mm-hmm.
them kids play. And the coroner said uh, he was gone by midnight. And that was in October of 2018.
So here's yet another just blow to your life,
Yep.
and I'm
Hmm.
I'm assuming you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that your relationship with Jesus is the one of the key pieces that helped you through that terrible time.
It's the only thing, really. The only thing that got me through that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
I've had to cling tighter,
mm,
you know, not looser, but tighter,
yeah,
because it is the only thing that gets me through.
yeah,
As we get closer, man, the way things are going, believers are gonna have to stick closer to Jesus than ever before.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Because things are getting weird, as we
Yep.
can see.
Yeah. Well, and I'm reminded of the fact that, Jesus didn't promise to make it easy. In fact, he asked us to take his yoke upon him. A yoke is
Right.
work. That's not it's
Yeah.
a pinch point around the neck,
Right.
but that God will walk with us and partner with us through
Right.
that. And so I just really
Hmm.
appreciate, Dave, you're sharing your story and pointing folks to the fact that the relationship with Jesus helped you through those difficult things, and I'm real thankful for that. You had talked about, as we were setting this up, maybe playing something. You're still sax man, still playing. In fact, he has a great album called Thrush Hour out. Thrush Hour was released on Sparrow Records a few years back. I encourage folks to check it
Dove
out.
Award nominee, by the
Oh,
way.
that's right. It was a Dove Award
Yeah.
nominated album.
Nominee.
So do you want to play something out for us as we wrap up our conversation today? People need the Lord. Amen. We send out a newsletter every Saturday asking folks to pray for people who have made Christian music and who are involved in that and have been involved in that. How specifically can we be praying for you, Dave, in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, I could maybe get my career on track a little better and pull out of this pandemic and just start, playing music again. It's starting to come back, but I think that specifically, just to get out and start playing again.
I guess for me, the important takeaway from my exchange with Dave Thrush today was how important his relationship with Jesus was to him. So many times we hear people's testimony about how wonderful everything was after they became a Christ follower. But Dave's story didn't quite go that way, did it? He had his family shun him because his faith didn't match their faith. He had doctors suggest that he abort his son, who would obviously have some significant health complications. And he struggled through a tough adoption and ultimately the death of his adopted son due to health issues. But did you notice that Dave wasn't bitter about those tough situations? While he admitted that those were some of the most difficult times of his life, he stated that his relationship with God helped him through them. I guess the reason I'm emphasizing this is because we hear so much about how a relationship with Jesus makes everything better. And I think we often assume that that means all of our prayers will be answered just the way we want them to be. People will be healed, relationships will be mended, and everything's going to go just smoothly. But that isn't necessarily what God promised. What I noticed was that Dave recognized how his faith in Jesus helped him through those difficult times. I think of the verses in Matthew 28 where Jesus is giving instruction to the disciples on how to spread the gospel. He said, quote, "Be sure of this, I am with you always, even till the end of the age." Or how about in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where he is sharing about a difficult situation in his own life? He said that every time he asked God to remove the thorn in his flesh, he was always told, quote, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." I hope our conversation today encourages you to see past the stuff of religion and see the relationship of walking with Jesus. And I'm confident that God will do just as he has promised, to give you his power and his presence as we go through those difficult times. As always, thanks for joining me for this conversation today. I am grateful that we get to spend this time together each week hearing stories of God's amazing faithfulness. As a regular listener to this podcast, would you mind taking a few minutes and rating it on your favorite podcast app? Reviews and ratings really help spread the word so that other folks can hear about these great conversations. And if you have comments or questions for me, please feel free to drop me a message on any of the social media platforms. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon by searching for @CCMExchange. Or you can always drop me an email on the website christianmusicarchive.com. I'm really looking forward to our time together next week when I have another great conversation with one of the musicians you'll find on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. So until then, remember this: God loves you. In fact, he's crazy about you.